Back in 2019, Motorola made this. It's a terrible 4G eSIM only phone, but with the iconic Motorola V3 look. So iconic that it does this. It has an outer screen that can actually run apps with no multi-star or good lock or whatever. Natively, you can use this phone without opening it. Of course, it's not great, but this is. This is the Motorola RAZR Plus 2023, and this was when I could truly say that Samsung failed at the flip. Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review with a 2-year-old flip phone that's still running solid. Let's see if it's still worth buying today. Now on paper there's some good things and some bad things. For one, this is a flip phone with a pretty decent outer screen, but looking at the phone closed, it's all premium and strong. We get the 3.6-inch flexible OLED panel that has cutouts for the camera and flash, almost being square with the resolution being 1066 by 1056 pixels. This is a 144Hz display that actually looks pretty good and matches the internal screen's 413 pixels per inch, which is on par with 1080p. While it goes up to 1100 nits and the inside goes up to 1400 nits, expect around 500 nits or so brightness wise if you do use the manual brightness like I do on both screens. Just like the inside screen, the touch sampling rate can go up to 360 Hz when playing games, and I bring this up because you can actually play games on this outer screen. This is covered by Gorilla Glass Victus, while the back has the same thing, unless you get the magenta one that has the vegan leather. The metal of the phone is 7000 series aluminum, which wraps around the whole phone and the hinge. On the left side, we have the SIM tray. The top is the hinge that says nothing. Remember that the logo and RAZR name is on the back. And the right side has the volume buttons and the power button that doubles as a fingerprint scanner. There's also a hole for the microphone, I believe. Then on the bottom, the top portion has the microphone, while the bottom portion has another microphone, the USB-C 2.0 port, and a bottom loudspeaker that pairs with the earpiece to give you a decent stereo feel. Just make sure to turn off spatial sound unless you like tinny audio. While we have the phone open, this is a plastic 6.9-inch 1080p 165Hz OLED panel that's pretty tall at 22 by 9, beyond cinematic, but looks great. You can see my screen protector cracking, but it has been since the last time I reviewed this, so not a huge deal, I guess. Also in real life, I rarely see people breaking these screens because of this or the hinge, so I'm not really worried. There is a hole punch for the front camera and technically large plastic bezels all around, but viewing content on this is definitely better than the original RAZR. Not to mention the hinge holds in more places, of course for things like camcorder mode. Once open, the phone is 6.99mm thick and 6.7 inches tall. Very tall. But at the same time, this phone is thinner than a lot of phones at their thicker points, especially the iPhone Air. This 188.5 gram phone has some heft to it and is pretty good for repairability because it's IP52 dust and water resistant, also known as not water resistant. We also get 5G with no ultra-wideband support, Wi-Fi 6E, and Bluetooth 5.3. Powering the phone, we have a combined 2-cell battery that reaches about 3,800 milliamps, which sounds bad, and showing you battery health is useless thanks to the Android 15 update, but Digital Wellbeing told me about 2 hours of screen on time was 40% of battery usage. Not great, but also draining the battery in a day is definitely a challenge. And yes, I tested a long time ago, the outer screen drains as quick as the inner screen, so that won't help battery life. We get 30 watts of wired charging and 5 watts of wireless charging, the former which is fast enough. There is a Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chip in here with 8GB of RAM that is expandable to 16GB as well as 256GB of UFS 3.1 storage. There are 12GB RAM and 512GB options out there, and apparently a 4GB version out there, but I have never seen any of those even online. Performance is great, but it's not great at handling that heat, something that's noticeable when holding the phone horizontally thanks to the board being on the top portion of the phone, which is pretty standard for flip phones in general. When vertically browsing, the phone can warm up, but you'll probably not notice. As for the software, we have Android 15 on here, with Android 16 being the last promised major update, and June 2027 being the end of security patches. Making ROMs for this looks difficult, so don't rely on that to give us Android 17. You know, for the longest time, I didn't know that the OS was called MyUX, but yes, you actually get a decent amount of customization, gestures, and button mapping, but I like to make my phone pretty basic. I like how they added the always on display after launch, but it is kind of weird and super bright, and I don't really see a way to change that. A lot of this is from other Motorola phones, but they're all pretty great and fairly useful. As for the flip design, I really wish they figured out the OG RAZR look because this one kind of sucks, but the 2023 RAZR Plus is actually really solid and seems like it's worthy of the name and price tag. That said, I really wish the metal design didn't remind me of the Samsung Z Flip 4G and 5G. To be honest, this doesn't really deserve a section. I will preface this by saying that they're not terrible, but they're definitely here because they have to be, not because Motorola wanted to put them on here. The front camera is a 32 megapixel fixed focus sensor, which calling it a front camera is always weird because there you go. It does some good things like pixel binning to an 8 megapixel shot, which is, well, an 8 megapixel shot. It records 4K 60 frames per second video, which is nice to see, as there are some companies that would throw in a 100 megapixel camera here and only do 1080p at 30 frames per second. Still, good enough, but not great, but also not surprising given that it's the exact same sensor from the base 2023 RAZR. Then we have a 13 megapixel ultra-wide camera that focuses, allowing for macro photography, and it's good at it. You can do 4K 30 frames per second max on this camera, which is strange, and nope, you can't do HDR on that camera in this format like the main camera. While it's not the exact same part, the specs seem to be the same as the base RAZR on this one as well. But the main camera is completely different, for the worse. The main camera is a 12 megapixel optically stabilized sensor that's capable of 4K 60 frames per second video. Yes, the base RAZR of 2023 is a 64 megapixel sensor that is not only higher in megapixel count, but also a physically larger sensor at half an inch or 1/2.0, as the RAZR Plus's 12 megapixel camera is a 1/2.55 inch sensor. The previous RAZR from 2022 had a 50 megapixel 1/1.55 inch sensor. In most cases, phones beat this camera, but this point and shoot 1/2.3 inch sensor on this Lumix is a bigger sensor, and again, that base RAZR has a larger sensor than this Lumix. All this to say that yes, the shots aren't going to be spectacular, but also they're not unusable. The video at 4K 60 is pretty great, no HDR in that mode, which is honestly fairly common, with some flagships barely getting that now. This is a thin phone with a very minimal camera bump and a screen that surrounds the camera, so I'm not too disappointed. That said, this has to be spec-wise the worst camera they've ever shoved into a flipping RAZR. Another aspect to think about is that other than having a slightly wider aperture at f1.5 versus f1.7, the Motorola Moto Z2 Play has the same camera specs. The budget/mid-range phone from 2017 has almost the same specs. But again, you can be the judge of the shots and videos, which I think are usable, but once you read the specs, I don't know if I should be disappointed or impressed with what they did with such low-spec cameras. Maybe the image processor and the CPU is just that good. This phone is ironic. I've expressed that flipping phones are not really for me, as folding phones have more of a purpose. If you like small phones, you're probably not going to like this one. Sure, you can use the outer screen to do a lot of stuff. Some apps may look weird or feel weird, but in theory, you can run the phone like you would a small phone. At 15.1 millimeters, it's a thick phone when closed and pretty much the same as the competition at the time. Open the screen up, and again, you get this 6.9 inch beyond cinematic aspect ratio, depending on who you talk to, of 22:9, and it feels like a tall phone that can be used with one hand, but you need two hands if there's things on the top that you need to touch. Or you can fold it down a little bit, I guess. This is what I would call the sizing paradox. But at the same time, this makes the reason I don't like this phone strange. Why do I need to open a phone up every time I want to use it when I could just have a phone that's always open? Well, the thing is that the screen is larger and taller than, well, any Motorola phone that they sell besides other RAZRs. I would compare this to the Moto Edge Plus, but it seems 2023 was the last time that they made the Plus, almost making the RAZR be their flagship devices, ironically, given that they almost never had modern flagship processors besides the 2025 RAZR 60 Ultra. But can I be honest with you? This is not a $1,000 phone, never was, and well, sure, it has two screens, and I remember comparing this to the $699 Think phone at the time, or heck, the $800 Moto Edge Plus 2023. and clearly those are the better options. When we look into the used market, sure, if your budget is under $300 or $400, then we have options, but looking at these three phones, the RAZR Plus becomes the cheapest of the bunch. What's wrong? The camera and the battery aren't great, but look, those are solvable issues. Don't like the flip style of the phone? Well, then there's no fixing that. But if you do like the flip style, maybe you should get this. Now you may be thinking, okay, I want to flip, but what about the other flips that are out there? Well, I'm in the US, so we have the Samsung Z Flip 4, and sure, pricing is similar, but remember the RAZR comes with 256 gigabytes of storage stock. That also has a smaller screen, so you're probably going to want to go up to the Flip 5, and that's more money. Not to mention the durability is questionable when given Samsung definitely sells more units than Motorola, but there seems to be a lot of Samsung flips breaking screens regardless of models, while Motorola happens, but I guess not too frequently. These little creases on my screen scare me, but it's probably just time to replace the screen protector. That said, of all the flips and folds that I've ever used, I've personally never had any issues outside of the screen protectors. And that's my review of the Motorola RAZR Plus 2023, one of the best flips out there, just with some flaws. But what do you think? Do you think Samsung does a better job at flips? Let me know, and as always, thanks for joining the 1%, and thanks for watching.